Hello again, everyone. It's Mark here. I'm the founder of the Arts and Culture Network. We're at 150,000 or more now, I think, across our 8 LinkedIn groups around the world, which is very exciting. I don't get to meet everybody, but when I do, it's a delight. And Nigel and I met face to face on Friday. We have our face to face meetings in London on the last Friday afternoon of every month. And that was a great pleasure. And Nigel, thank you so much for joining us as a full member. This
Thank you for
is
having me.
it's really as you know, we're member funded, so it's very much appreciated. So we're going to have some fun today. I'm going to create Nigel's fantasy cultural year from the answers to 10 easy questions. But before we do, Nigel, I know you're in North London there in Muswell Hill, and perhaps you'd like to just say hi to everyone briefly and tell us a little bit about your superpowers and your and where your passions lie.
Sure. Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody else. I suppose I describe myself nowadays as a head of content. But I've been working in video copywriting, storytelling, really, for well, it depends. Depends on what the job I'm looking at feels like. Sometimes I say 15 years, but really it's more than 20, but that gives your age away. So I'm just
I do exactly the same thing.
Um, but yeah, I kind of built a career combining video. I mean, I started out in television. I started out in television as a runner and researcher, as you do, but making, and my background is actually, I studied Japanese at university and lived in Japan for a number of years and kind of fell into TV production. It's a long story, but somebody at the BBC was looking for somebody with knowledge of Japan to help them on some documentaries for BBC Choice, which then became BBC Three, which also dates me a little bit. And I said to them, they got me in for a couple of weeks to do some research, and then they were going to film in Tokyo, and I said, "Well, you have to take me with you because I know Tokyo like the back of my hand." And it's, even back then, it was like, "Well, budgets." And I was like, "Well, I'll just stay with my friend. You don't need to pay for a hotel room." So they sort of acquiesced and took me, and I kind of proved my worth. They would drive along in vans. There was a lot of kind of nightlife in Tokyo filming we were doing. They sort of kick me out of the van and tell me to find the impossible to find, and then the next morning I would turn up and say, "Yep, found them," and kind of my career took off from there because the producer was very impressed. But I did a lot of TV work. A lot of it was to do with Japan films for Discovery Channel. Um, Moved into news. Well, I had a couple of stints in news for Bloomberg, which was also in Tokyo, and for Reuters in London. And so I've kind of flip-flopped in a way from these full-time roles and being a freelancer in television. And then at one point, maybe around 10 years ago, I think. I was at Reuters and I asked my team to look for the things they found most impressive that people were doing in the video world. And everything kind of came back as these branded content videos, which I guess in the past were called corporate videos, but there's branded content and they were incredible stories, often tangentially related to the brand itself, but really beautifully shot, really nicely made films, the kind of things that wouldn't get commissioned on TV, but really, really interesting. And I kind of fell into that. Did a lot of freelance work. The background at Reuters Bloomberg meant I was doing quite a bit of financial services to begin with. And then kind of another random turn in my career where I just fall into things kind of by accident. I got a job at Sotheby's auction house as a head of video in London. And they had a CEO and a CMO at the time who'd come from an entertainment background, were really pushing the digital strategy overall for the company, and video and content was a big part of that. And then had the most kind of incredible, um, almost 6 years really, of doing amazing videos. I mean, one of the first projects was David Bowie's art collection, which we sold, which I could have kind of left after that really, because I was a big Bowie fan anyway, and got to kind of live in his world with his art curators and advisors, and even down to sort of doing the playlists for the gallery when the exhibition was on, but made some lovely videos and worked with incredible people there, collectors, Paul Smith and Victoria Beckham, Virgil Abloh, a whole range. I made a great series at Chatsworth House, which won a bunch of awards, Webby Awards, Lovey Awards, looking at one aspect of the Duke's collection that led you into the history. So it could, one episode was about portraits, started with a Lucian Freud portrait of his mother, which his mother's friends would come to the house, and one of them covered it up with a scarf because she hated it so much. And he'd tell this anecdote of hanging out in Freud's sort of scuzzy Paddington studio with gambling debt collectors banging on the door, and you can imagine the sort of young Duke, royalty hiding on the floor because Lucian told him to pretend they weren't in. So there are all these fabulous stories, and again, that sort of comes back to storytelling. The through line through everything I've done, I think, is telling great stories, and that sounds kind of odd to people who aren't perhaps in the creative industry, especially when you're doing corporate stuff. You sort of bang on about story and story being the most important, and I think then eventually people do understand that there's a lot of content out there now, and good content, but the key thing that brings the best stuff through, I think, is storytelling.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We remember stories much more than we remember facts. So yeah, that's great. So thank you for that. So looking ahead, we're now in what, March 25,
Mm.
and the opportunities seem to come to you, which is great. So I'm looking forward to hearing about your next adventure. But if there's anyone out there who needs a head of content with a storytelling heart, here he is, and that could be either full-time, freelance, or contract work. And ironically, in our sector, the creative sector and the arts and culture world, we should be the ones telling the best stories in that respect. So here he is. Nigel Hilditch is here for when you need him. Thank you so much, Nigel, for doing that and giving us an intro into your professional world. Now, I'd like to have some fun now, based on some of what you've heard,
Mm.
what I've heard, I'm afraid. I'm going to create your fantasy cultural year. Okay.
Okay.
And to do so, and I have a magic wand, a time machine, and a Star Trek transporter. Okay,
Mhm.
so we can hop around in time and space for this.
Okay.
In order to do this, I need to place you somewhere in the world, and I'm going to ask you then, what's your favorite building?
Favorite building? That's a good question. I really like St. Pancras Station. I,
Oh, lovely.
yeah, I would say that if I had, when they do the Evening Standard thing, if you could live in one building, where would it be? That's where I would. I don't know how I'd convert it into something livable, but that's where I'd live.
Okay, I have a magic wand, as you know, so I can arrange anything. I'm just going to show St. Pancras to our viewers so that they get a sense of the ornate, wonderful Gothic nature um,
Yeah.
of this wonderful place. There it is in all its glory. There's another one there. Is it
Funny,
Puget?
really, because my leanings tend to be a bit more sort of modernist and minimalist, but I don't know why that one really.
Oh,
Just
and then there's John Betchman
Mhm.
standing there. There it is. Wonderful. Is it Pugin, the architect?
I don't know. I don't know
It's
very much
very
about it.
similar to the Houses of Parliament, isn't it? And that was Pugin. So, but that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I love that. So there we
Yeah.
go. St. Pancras Station
Okay.
for everyone. Excellent. Um, Now I'd like you to imagine you're sitting. Let's say there's a pop-up cafe on the outside of St. Pancras Station, or possibly the other side of the road, there
Mm.
near King's Cross.
Mm.
And it's 6 p.m. on a Friday evening. You've been admiring the architecture. The sun, as it sets, is lighting up the building, and you're sitting there enjoying the view. And there's a drink next to you. What would I find there?
Probably a pint of beer, but I'm quite partial in the last few months to a Negroni. Sort of,
Ooh.
I mean, I had them before, but I bought the stuff to make them for Christmas, and I find that's kind of my tipple of choice at the
Okay,
moment.
what goes into a Negroni? I can't remember.
Gin, it's gin, vermouth, and so what's the other thing? It's like a sort of brand wise, it's like a Campari and then the Martini Rosso. So one's a vermouth and the other one I forget now. But anyway, it's just sort of
Brilliant.
it's
You can
powerful
have,
stuff
and
and
are you a bitter or a lager drinker?
lager.
Right, so a pint of lager with a Negroni chaser. There we go.
Exactly.
There we go. Now, there's a book next to you as well. You've been enjoying that. It could either be your favorite book, a book that's been with you all your life, or a book that's changed your life, or a book that is a recent discovery. What might we find there next to you?
That's a good question. I have this conversation all the time that I'm terrible for someone who reads a lot and watches a lot of films. I'm terrible at remembering the names of them so I recommend any good films you've seen or books. I'm like, but I would say um, there is a book called Your Brain on Art. There's two authors, and one of them name I remember is a lady called Susan Maximer, and sadly for the other lady, I can't remember her name. But um,
Ivy Ross.
yes, that's
Yeah.
right. And this was this has been kind of my Bible for the last couple of years because my last full-time project was for the Arts Society, which is a long-running arts education charity set up in the 60s by a group of pioneering young women who couldn't access arts education. So they set up this organization really to learn about the arts. But um, a couple of years ago, the then CEO and board wanted to diversify their offering and wanted to create a digital content studio to diversify the audience in all senses of that, geographically, age, ethnicity, all of those DE and I aspects. Um, and the idea was that the arts are good for us and good for our well-being, mental and physical health. And I think you find I noticed because this is my job, but there's almost an article a week now on this in one of the papers, and research and the World Health Organization are onto it. Um, this book, Your Brain on Art, really is was my Bible, and it goes through all of the ways that connecting with the arts, all of them, when I say people say art, people think, oh, we put paintings, but specifically all of the arts, whether that's participatory or um, more passive engagement, is all good for you. And it could be just watching TV or watching a film or reading a book. Um, and I just think it was a really interesting way of framing and trying to engage a younger audience who might even be put off. A lot of statistics say, something like 90% plus of Gen Z consider themselves creators because they're always making content on their phones. But a similar percentage are put off by the term arts and culture. It feels highbrow, overly intellectual, and they don't like it. And so the real task of this job was to come at it in a different way and say, well, lots of people are into what's good for them, good for their health, whether that's meditation or health in terms of dietary types of things. What if adding in, and it was a great piece of research out of Australia, so 2 hours a week of arts engagement is extremely good for you. And that's not a
Yeah.
lot to do. That could be a film, or it could be some reading, or it could be a gallery, an art gallery, or it could be drawing or painting. So anyway, that's the book I would have because it's
Okay.
absolutely fascinating.
It's great. It's available on Amazon. The The strapline is, we're on the verge of a cultural shift in which the arts can deliver potent, accessible, and proven solutions for the well-being of everyone. Yeah, it's kind of part of a conversation I've been having with others about the suggestion, and I think I might have mentioned this on Friday, that we're moving out of an economic age into a cultural age, and there is evidence piling up to suggest that it's good for us. I mean, with social prescribing now in the UK, doctors can prescribe a trip to the theatre, which is great. Excellent. So that's Your Brain on Art by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. Excellent. Got it. Right. So next up, you're feeling quite pleased with yourself because you've just come from a meeting inside St Pancras Station with a wealthy London-based family foundation who are on the same page as us about this shift, and they're on the same page as us about the benefits. But crucially, it requires content, and so they've become familiar with the work that you do, and they would like to hire you for a year, okay, to travel the world to create a global league table on the quality of content as part of this shift towards a cultural renaissance. Okay, there is a TED talk in it. There is a TV series in it. There is a book deal, and there's a global university lecture tour, should you wish. It's first class all the way. Friends and family can come and visit you while you're traveling the world. And all you have to do is to say, yes, please, and I'd like to start in this city.
Okay. I'm gonna say Tokyo because I used to live there and I love it. It's kind of my second home. I've lived in London for longer now, but there's something about Tokyo when I get there. I don't know what it is, but I feel I'm home now.
Wow.
So
I gather that the city is about the size of the M25. Would that be right?
yeah, it's one of those weird ones where the definition of it is kind of, people say it's got 30, 40, 50 million people, but it has big cities that effectively merge into it. So Yokohama's got several million, and Kawasaki and Chiba, they're all cities in their own right, but it's sort of,
Mm.
but the actual central Tokyo is it's kind of like London, and I think the population is not dissimilar,
Oh, okay.
but it's just instead of having countryside a couple of stops out, it just keep going.
Yeah. Now, excellent. Tokyo it is. Okay.
Mm.
You're on the plane. You turned left when you got on the plane. And the steward brings you a nice cool lager with a Negroni chaser
Mm.
and a note from the family foundation. They've got one condition for this trip that they
Mm.
wanted you to know about once you were airborne.
Mm.
Okay. They'd like to experiment on you a little bit, and the first thing they'd like to do is to have you listen to only one very specific genre of music for 12 months, to the exclusion of all else. In those circumstances, what type of music or genre would you choose?
Ah, it's a good one.
Mhm.
I feel like I want to say something new that would intrigue me, but I guess music's very important to me. If I couldn't listen to anything else other than this, I'm a kind of indie guitar pop boy at heart. So I think it would be that.
Okay. Who might feature on the playlist?
It might feature on the playlist. So I guess it would be kind of lots of Manchester-based bands. That's not far from where I grew up. So anything from Joy Division and Smiths going back a bit to then, I was of the right age at the explosion of uh, Brit pop. Actually, before that, grunge. I was
Hmm.
at school then, so kind of Nirvana's, Pearl Jam's, Mudhoney's, and then Britpop took off. Well, starts with Suede and Pulp, Blur, Oasis.
Are you going to
I'm finding
Oasis?
now, actually, as I think enough time has passed, and music obviously comes in cycles, and I guess you could say that kind of 90s period harked back a little bit to the 60s, or a lot to the 60s in Oasis's case, but we're at 30 years on. I don't know if this is correct, but I feel like there's lots of young bands that I'm hearing that were probably now inspired by that 90s scene, and I'm kind of
Mm,
quite liking their vibe more than perhaps I have new bands in the last 10 years prior, maybe.
excellent. Okay. So you arrive in Tokyo, and there's a group of young filmmakers and content developers have been detailed to take you under their wing. You'll
Mm,
probably have friends you'll want to see.
mm.
Um, and where would be the ultimate loft apartment in Tokyo for you to reside in?
Ooh, that's a good question because I mean Tokyo changes so quickly compared to say, compared to London or New York or any sort of big other big capital cities. I mean, when I lived there, you could go away on holiday for 2 weeks and come back, and your favorite restaurant's gone, your favorite bar's gone, something brand new there. There's a building that's just appeared, and so it might be different. So I'm sort of basing this. I always like, though, there's an area called Omotesando. Harrod people is very close to Harajuku, which people perhaps know. Kind of street fashion art center of Tokyo. It's kind of arty. It's walking distance to Shibuya with the famous crossing and an area called Aoyama. So I think if I could plonk myself there, you're bang in the middle of the heart of everything.
Excellent. You can have that.
Thanks.
Now, your colleagues install you in this apartment.
Mm.
Um, they say they're going to come back and take you to a dance-based performance, and then
Hmm.
out to dinner. Now, this is where the time machine and the magic wand come in because you don't have to remain in Japanese culture. You can have anything on that stage. So if I could offer you a dance performance, historical even, any dancers, living or not, any dance group or dance style, what would you choose?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think of the art forms, of all the art forms, dance is one that I'm least familiar with, or least likely to go and watch, I think. So
Okay.
that's a tricky one.
Well, I think we'll find that the Ballet Rambert are on tour,
Okay,
and there'll be a performance of contemporary dance
right.
um, that is inspired by Japanese culture.
Mm,
There we go.
okay.
Now, what about dinner? Tokyo will offer national cuisine from all over the world, I imagine, and you don't have to stay Japanese. What
Mm,
would be your national cuisine of choice for dinner after the show?
yeah, I would stay. It does, and there's very good food from all over the world, but I would stay Japanese, particularly there. You know,
Okay.
you can get, in my experience at least, the bog standard sushi joint is better than most high end
And
ones.
is bento a cooked sushi? That's the warm version, isn't it? I think bento.
A bento's a lunchbox, really, because it's sort of
Right.
divided into little sections, and it could kind of, there's rice being the main one, but then a bento could be anything. It could be sushi, sashimi, but it could be teriyaki chicken or salmon. So
Mm,
that's
nice.
a lunchbox thing.
Lovely. Now we're going to jump countries and cities now again. Where would
Mm.
you like to go next?
Well, I was thinking this. I'd said Tokyo, but I think I've never been to South America, and I think I've traveled all over Asia and Southeast Asia in particular, as well as Japan, and I've never made it to South America, so that's where I would like to go.
Okay.
And I don't know which city. I guess there'd be any number of places, but I would like to. I'd like to go to Buenos Aires, but many others. But let's say that.
Okay. Buenos Aires it is then. Now it's sport day in Argentina.
Mm.
And with breakdancing in the Olympics, you could argue that some sports constitute performance art.
Mm.
So, unless you're Australian.
That's what I should have said for my dance performance, isn't it?
Um, and you can watch a sporting event of any kind for a couple of hours. What would you
Mm.
like to either watch or participate in?
Oh, football.
Football in
Absolutely.
Argentina, it
No,
would have to
especially if I was in Argentina. Yeah, I'd go and see, I don't
Okay.
know,
Well,
Boca.
we're in international season and England are playing Argentina in Buenos Aires. So
Lovely.
there we
Lovely.
go.
I'll go see that.
Let's jump again. Where shall we go?
Um, where are we going to go now? Possibly then Africa, because that's also, other than um, several trips to Morocco, I've not really explored Africa.
Okay,
Um,
where would you like to go in Africa?
I'd be kind of interested, I think, to go to, I would say Ghana. There seems to be a lot of interesting art, cultural stuff coming out of Ghana,
Okay,
music.
that sounds like good a good jump. And Accra is the capital of Ghana. So we're going to go to Accra. And in Accra, there is a new digitally enhanced art gallery.
Mhm.
Okay. And they use virtual reality headsets to let people step into the work of famous artists.
Mm,
It's three-dimensional. It's 360 degrees. It might be animated. You can step into the work of a famous artist and walk around and see in 3 dimensions what they were unable to give us in two.
mm.
Whose work would you like to explore in that way?
Um, that's a good question, and it's quite a good question for me because when I was at Sotheby's, I wanted to do a VR project. It was sort of reasonably nascent at that time, and certainly Sotheby's auction houses weren't in the VR world. Um, and I had departments, various different departments would come and say, "Let's do a VR project." And going back to the storytelling, I'm like, "There's no story. It's just for the sake of it, and it won't be interesting." If there was a surrealist art sale, that might be kind of interesting. And lo and behold,
Mm.
a couple of months later, it turns out that Sotheby's do have a specific sale for surrealist art. And we created a VR project which had, who was there? Well, certainly Dali. Who else? There was Magritte, I think, Paul Delvaux, one other, I can't remember. But we created an experience where you could get to walk through these dreamlike landscapes and be able to look around and see where you just come from and what was happening, and then you sort of walk through a door and then you're in the next painting. So um, I've already done that, but it was a good opportunity to mention it, I think.
Yeah, oh, that's
It just
great. I mean,
it lends it, what's the point of VR if there's no story, or and some of it's very gimmicky, but that felt right because it's dreamlike stuff, and it felt like the way to do it.
perfect. We'll stay in surrealism then. Um, Now I'm going to bring you back to London
Mm,
for a week, and we're going to do something together every evening. Okay.
mm,
We're going on Monday, we're going to a historic pop or rock concert.
mm,
On Tuesday, we're going to the opening night of a theatre play, historically.
mm.
Wednesday is a West End or Broadway musical.
Okay.
Thursday is the opera, and
Mm,
Friday is film
okay.
movies. So, of all the concerts you've seen, or perhaps missed even, that you regret or would love to revisit and re-experience,
Mm,
what music concert would you want to go back to or go to that you missed?
mm. That's a good one, isn't it? It's the kind of thing that pops up on social media, and you have to not choose which one he's going to see.
Mm.
I always pick Bob Marley because um, quite a few of the others that appear in those lists I have been lucky enough to see. Um,
You never saw Bob Marley live?
Never saw Bob Marley live, no, and I feel like I would like to go back and see him. So I was lucky enough. I've seen Bowie. I'm lucky enough to see David Bowie at the Budokan, which is a kind of legendary venue in Tokyo.
I know it. I think I've been there. One of my favorite bands, Dream Theater, recorded an amazing show there
Mm,
live at the Budokan in the 90s, late 90s. But I'll
yeah.
be with you for Bob. I could have been at the Rainbow um, for Bob Marley. I was 12, I think, and didn't get to go there. And then there was another one, I think, Lyceum, 78, perhaps.
Mm,
Um, yeah, there's a wonderful thing on BBC Sounds about Bob Marley. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Um, yeah, if you search Bob Marley at BBC Sounds,
mm.
there's a really good sort of six-part series about him and his
Oh,
life
okay.
and his influence. Really good. Excellent. Okay,
Mm.
what about a theatre play on Tuesday? We're in London.
Ah, good question. I don't know. I would. I don't know what play it would be, but I'd like to maybe see something with Laurence Olivier because when people actors talk about actors, he's always held up as, an incredible actor. And I think I'd like to be able to see him in person doing something to see why. Why do people say that? Why do people who are at the very top of their game, who were around, why do they
Mm,
cite him as the very best?
okay, might be Shakespeare then. Could be King Lear or Hamlet.
Could be, yeah. I guess he did those, didn't he? And yeah, I'm not sure what it would be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll go and see um, uh,
Um,
one of those, or we'll do both. What about a West End or Broadway musical? Does anything spring to mind that you particularly have enjoyed or would like to see?
I kind of grew up in the theatre. My parents were uh, amateur dramatics stars, if you like. For a long time, they would play the leading man, leading lady role, and they had kind of regular jobs. My dad was worked in engineering. My mom was secretary at local radio. But by night, they would sort of transform into these sort of characters. Um, and so I've sort of seen all the old musicals multiple times. And I suppose I'm trying to think what my favorite would be. But I thought my if we're doing anything, it wouldn't be West End because they never appeared there. But I would like to go back, especially as they both passed away. I would like to go back and see something that they were in at the time, and that would be my kind of choice. But I'm trying to think what it would be.
Did they do any Gilbert and Sullivan?
Well, my mom grew up doing Gilbert and Sullivan, and my granddad and my grandmother exclusively, they were also into theatre amateur dramatics and did exclusively Gilbert and Sullivan. So that's kind of how my mom cut her teeth. Um, and as a small kid, I would go and see a lot of that with my granddad still in those. So and they were, I didn't really get it, I guess,
Hmm.
because actually, the humor and stuff was often designed to make political points, and all of
Yeah.
that was kind of way over my head. But my granddad, in his day, had been, I think, what they called a patter man. He did the sort of fast comic roles, which there's one in all of those Gilbert.
Yeah. I am the Major General of that one, isn't it? I am
Yeah, 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 and the Mikado,
Pirates,
and
Pirates
things,
of Penzance, I
and
think.
Lance, and
Yeah.
yeah, all of
Brilliant. Well, that's a lovely thing to do. I'm going to send you back to watch your granddad and your parents in one of those shows. There we go.
great. That would be.
Are you an opera fan?
Um, in the sense that I would put opera on myself to listen to, or specifically go to the opera to see it. No, but my dad listened to opera all the time, and so I would, yeah, I admire them and think some of it's phenomenal.
I shall take you to um, Oh, I think we'll do the Meister Singers by Wagner. There we go.
All right.
Part of the Ring cycle, and we'll go
Mm.
to we'll go to Glyndebourne on the south coast because they have hour-long intervals every hour. So you get to eat during the interval.
Excellent.
Excellent. Now, I'd like you to choose for Friday. It's movie night, and we're going to go to the IMAX at by London Bridge.
Mm.
Got the best seats in the house, wonderful huge screen, fantastic surround sound. Um, is there a film that you love that I may not have seen, do you think?
Ooh, interesting that you may not have seen. Because if you're going to watch it there, there's specific types of films that lend themselves to that, aren't they? Which tend to be the big blockbusters, which
I do, yeah.
perhaps you have. But I
Or is there a film that you can't start watching and stop?
um this is where I go back to my point of being unable to remember off the top of my head names of films and things. But I like well, I like a whole range of films. I'll happily watch a Marvel blockbuster with my kids, the Avengers ensemble ones, which would lend themselves to an IMAX. But I like
Would, yeah.
then Ozu, Japanese director, sort of family dramas. If you know, Tokyo Story is the sort of the famous one. It's a trilogy, but Tokyo Story seems to be the most famous of that trilogy, and it has kind of similar actors in each movie playing different roles. And it's one of those nothing happens. It's all sort of set in the same room. He's famous for putting the camera very low on the floor. That's his, if you get
Nice. I shall have a
over
look.
the director who wants to do that, then he's also a fan of Ozzy. But nothing really happens, but they're just very and they're black and white old films. Some and they're in Japanese and they're just incredibly engaging for some reason.
I assume you became fluent, did you, when you were living there?
Um, Reasonably so, yeah. Yeah, it was pretty good. It's only gone downhill since I stopped living there. But I worked. The only reason I'm hesitant to say yes because I got a job working for MTV in Japan, and I was hired by an American lady who was going to come and become my boss. And Japan's the second biggest record market in the world, but it's not the second biggest MTV by any means. And so it was this sort of exciting role to um, develop. But then she didn't come and she got a job somewhere else and sort of left me at the mercy of everyone there. Some of whom were very nice, but they didn't really want me there. And everything was, I then realized that there's a difference between being fluent and being able to do your job.
Right.
And if you've ever sat in meetings in English, in your own language, where you actually just sit there thinking, what is everyone talking about? That's in your own language, because in a meeting, you don't necessarily, people are not necessarily making a point succinctly or a point that you understand. And so that was my experience in Japanese, where after sort of 5 minutes or so, I'd be like, I kind of don't know what everyone's talking about now. So it was pretty good.
Yeah. Excellent.
Fluent, maybe quite not.
Okay. Excellent. Now I'm going to let you travel the world and complete this lovely project. But
Amazing.
before I do, I'm going to give you a hero lunch
Mm,
in London, 2 hour Japanese, lovely Japanese restaurant in London. You can invite any one person to have lunch with, um,
mm,
historical or otherwise, living or not,
mm,
famous or not.
mm,
Who would you dearly love to spend a couple of hours with just chatting to them to learn about them and their life?
mm. Um, Hitler. Not because I'm a
Right.
fan,
No,
put that
no.
out there first, but I'm kind of fascinated. I think I got to that point in my life where you have to suddenly get very into World War II history and understand this great event that shaped
Mm.
everything in the 20th century and still is shaping it. And I just find it kind of fascinating, like how he's, the personification of evil.
Yes.
Um,
Would he come over as barking mad? That's what I'd want to know, or would you be able to hold um, a kind of conversation with him that would be where would find out if there's any empathy or
exactly.
yeah.
That's kind of fascinating, I think.
Mm.
And
Okay.
also because he's not here, and I have met people who I did, really like their work. And there's that sort of old adage, isn't there? You never meet your heroes, and
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
disappointing if they're not very nice or what
Yeah.
have you. So in this case, you know, it's kind of win-win because I'm not expecting. If
Yes, I
there is
love it.
any redeeming features, it would be fascinating. If he is absolutely evil, it would just be there.
Similarly fascinating. Yeah.
Strange answer, maybe, but
No,
him.
I love that
And,
answer.
and,
Now we
and,
know.
and, and I'll redeem myself. Bowie, David Bowie.
Yes. Now with for both of those people, then, in a slight twist to this question, who do you think Hitler would invite from history?
Mm. Mm. That's interesting. Um, who would who would he invite? I suppose he might invite someone like Wagner,
Mm.
possibly, or the Kaiser, or mm,
He might want to find out if he's as bad as Genghis Khan, for example, or
right. But I think that's probably the thing, isn't it? I don't. He wouldn't have thought of himself. It's like the sort of when you hear actors who play villains, the sort of way into that is to not imagine that you're not the baddie in your own eyes. I
yeah,
suspect very much that Hitler didn't think, "Oh, I'm the most evil man that ever lived. Who killed? Who else could I come that would share my dis?"
perhaps Mike Myers then. That would
Yeah,
be
yeah,
Dr. Evil. Excellent. And
yeah.
what about David Bowie then? Who would David Bowie invite?
That's a good question as well. He might. I suppose it depends. And there was a certain point of it in the 70s where he got quite into the Aleister Crowley and his works. He may do that, but I think
Mm,
out of that, but he probably met all of his heroes. I think the Velvet Underground are big inspirations, but then
yeah,
I don't know that he would have
I
chosen.
think
He
he'd,
would have met them and he would have had dinner with them, and anyway, so he'd go back further. I think
yeah, um,
maybe some of the old blues guys,
yeah,
Wolf, those kind of people.
yeah.
I don't know.
Who was the Irish writer? The Importance of Being Earnest.
Wild, Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, I would. I think he'd probably enjoy lunch
Yeah,
with Oscar Wilde
yeah,
because of that kind of identity shifting.
yeah.
I mean, he was a David Bowie was a controversial figure in the 70s, late 60s and 70s, and
Mm.
I think they'd have something in common in that respect that they were being themselves, um,
Well,
and
there's a list out there of I can't remember which magazine, it doesn't matter, but if you Google it, there's a list of his recommended books, which is
mm,
a very good insight,
oh,
and
I'd
it's
have to have a look.
very eclectic.
Yeah, very good. Right. We're there. I'm going to let you travel the world and complete this wonderful project. The TED Talk is booked in, the book deal's done. You've got the series in the can, the TV series in the can, and you've been booked for another trip around the world to do a global university lecture tour on the global league tale of content development. In those circumstances, you've become the go-to person for where's the best content coming from, which is quite nice because you asked all your students that once, or your team. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this, Nigel. It's always a treat. It always produces surprises. So
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Pleasure. It was fun. I should have watched some more of them beforehand to prepare myself.
actually, it's more fun when you don't. So you did
Playing
it
it. Yeah.
exactly the right thing.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, as well for being one of our full members. You won't know this, but bits of your £10 a month are going to help other members in need, and we'll be doing that increasingly as we grow our membership. But couldn't do it without you. So thank you so much, and it was great to meet you face to face last Friday. And I'll let you know when this will appear in all of those places, and the profile. Most people will be watching it sitting in your profile on our website. There we go.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Don't rush off, but for the time being, Nigel Hilditch, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Great chatting to you.